The World Today. By shortwave radio, Columbia now brings you reports from its foreign correspondents overseas with summaries of the latest world news presented over these stations by Golden Eagle Gasoline. Go ahead, New York.
The details are not available. They will be in a few minutes. The White House is now giving out a statement. The attack apparently was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. The President's brief statement was read to reporters by Stephen Early, the President's secretary. A Japanese attack upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war. Such an attack would naturally bring a counterattack and hostilities of the kind that the President would war. There is no doubt from the such grant. This morning, Secretary Hull talked to Secretaries of War and of the special Japanese envoys. Admiral Nomura and Envoy Gruber at the State Department engaged a conference with Secretary of State. There was a statement this Sunday afternoon on the gravity of the Eastern. It is now simply all south. Even important things in South Asia. There is a fiction in official which came to the Navy indicated the Japanese steaming into Guyana. Japanese were a heavy escort. The southern condits of the capital of Thailand. It was on the basis that it sent to Emperor Hirohito and personal which appealed to call for restraint and peace. Its final from the U.S. and activities that substantiated a final capture or attack has attained in space. Britain, the Dutch East India, and Japan had invaded negotiated. Nomura and Roosevelt did the appointment with Mr. Hull today. He said 1:45 some minutes later, and turn will be for the Atlantic. Japan was attacking Pearl Harbor from the air. It's Tokyo demands to ensure that the was inaugurated. When the President propounded his about the last Tuesday. At that time, Tokyo replied that the movements were in North Indochina to offset Chinese movements on the Indochina border. The specific information of the State Department now and then was that the bulk of the Japanese troops were in a better position. The meeting between Secretary Hull and the Secretaries of War and Navy this morning was an example of the plans that are being laid. It would be a mistake for Japan to believe that these preparations are any kind of... Although officials on the definite consequences of a Japanese attack on Hawaii Island, there are indications of what is being considered and the steps which take the difference of diplomatic relations with Tokyo naval blockade in which the American Navy would take a leading part along with British units, the President on his own executive authority. Blockade, of course, as a matter of fact, according to the President's announcement, those hostilities are all ready. His attack comes from an air attack as Navy bases. Thus, we from the White House that Japanese airplanes have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and have now attacked Army and Navy bases in Manila. We return you now to New York and we'll give you later comes along from the White House.
Its moves in the progress of the American-Japanese discussions in Washington. Singapore and other crown colonies are ready for England, and a Far Eastern fleet has been created, headed by the 35,000-ton Prince of Wales. For direct restrictions in the East British capital, London.
London heard its first news of the attacks on Hawaii and the Philippines from John Charles Daly in New York just a few moments ago. The report had not arrived in London before this Columbia program began. It is, of course, too early to give you any reaction, but as you know, the British government made plain what would happen if America became involved in war with Japan some days ago. We did get earlier the British air reconnaissance in the South China Seas confirmed the earlier report of Japanese activities. The naval vessels and cruisers see up the southern tip of Indochina steaming toward the north. That announcement was earlier dispatches from heavy concentration Indochina and afloat. About the President's the Emperor of Japan would accept the It is legit communique said a battle was joined southeast of where the main German tanks killed the Tobruk. A few days when newspapers of arguments on caliber, the thickness of armor, tank speed versus tank out the airplane as compared to the anti-tank gun as weapons of destruction. Through these lengthy articles, there has received in Britain his modern war technique. Not all this recently that, for example, lit up with those air squads, damn tanks. Interesting discussions on the employment of air power. Many militaries are saying that British planes still not play the same integral part of the tank that the Germans do. A typical comment is this standard. Nobody says, would you, that the fleet be with its own soldiers with some of London's to on this broadcast direct from the just a few of the states. A nation put down a suspicion of the people much of I think Britain's cause good enough to stand on its own feet. They're more than the enemy's propaganda which they call them. And away over Britain are full hands. Let's tune in that the German media have wanted to country the right difference. Last control Norwegian become converted to the extent of historical stars. Now, the commissars, I thought a lot that's what Norwegian
attacks on the following a week in which the North campaign just months of hostile scale. These reports are interesting in the North campaign and will be for some time. Elliot,
apparently confronted with war, Japanese American Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu by air and from terrorists do not have these land aid. The aggressors to play within Navy bomber in Oahu. The risk was doomed as a very desperate weapon of the attack, but many and shipping Oahu to the Pacific. That is probably Japanese, and we don't know yet that's out. A Japanese attack also being made on Navy installations at Manila in the Philippines. Manila, and it's also of military importance, but it's far less formidable in the character of its system, the island of Oahu, and the Japanese, consequently, have greater way with attacks. The Japanese have a number of vessels, at least 3 or 4 of these, and perhaps more, the comparatively small, but operate about 20 aircraft from these converted carriers, and anywhere from 30 to 50 aircraft from their larger carriers. These would include both scouting and bombing aircraft, as well as fighters to protect the carriers, but in a case like this, a desperate bombers and put carriers to handle, expecting to take heavy losses. Question how much they purchase carry risk. Whether there will be an actual attempt at Japanese landing is not known. It is expected to be any attempt at Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands. It is hardly probable that a Japanese expedition carrying troops in sufficient numbers to attack Oahu with any hope of success could have proceeded across the Pacific without notice of it being had by our naval authorities. Consequently, it seems likely that this attack on Manila may be one of more proportions in troops. The Japanese policy apparently has been to delay as long as possible on the diplomatic front and to carry on their military preparations in the meanwhile, gaining as much time as they could. Of course, these brought time the diplomat in order to improve their fighting chances, and this certainly is borne out by what has now happened. We just had a flash. Oahu was attacked today by unidentified airplanes. That's another flash on the Japanese air attacks on Hawaii. Remember that Oahu is the military and political center of the Hawaiian group. The island itself is one of the most formidable maritime fortresses in the world. Heavy guns defend the ports of Pearl Harbor and Honolulu. Railway guns can be moved swiftly to any point. There is a very garrison which even a year or two ago numbered about 25,000 troops and probably now has been very considerably increased. There are powerful naval and army air forces on the island, including some of the Army's longest range bombers, 4-engine bombers based on Hickam Field, so that any appearance of any Japanese force in the neighborhood is likely to suffer very severely as soon as they can be located by these long-range bombers.
Continuing on the Far Eastern situation, this time we go abroad to get a report direct from the danger zone, from Manila in the Philippines, which has been attacked as we have told you. CBS correspondent Ford Wilkins has watched Manila get ready for this attack. And now, for the report of Ford Wilkins from Manila. Go ahead, Manila.
Panic is also because the part accepted. There is sufficient shelter and protection to make the city safe enough for those who remain. Whether war comes or not, situations where schools may be set up. One of these is to raise $10 to carry on. The original emergency fund is nearly exhausted. Manila's problems are reflected throughout the country. They are acute in places which are considered otherwise reflect the whole Pacific area where war threatens. Hong Kong has mobilized completely and called out volunteers. Singapore's fighting forces are standing ready for many months. In Thai, the little buffer state between French Indochina and Burma, the tension reaches its highest point. Japanese troops are crowding it on the east, and the large movement of Japanese ships accompanied by cruisers has been spotted by British patrol flyers from Singapore steaming up the Gulf of Siam towards Bangkok.
Turn you now to CBS in New York.
Broadcast a description of the attack made upon Manila. To carry out a defense, or rather ports and cruisers believe Japanese Gulf of Siam, which lands that comes from the shore. Says that the strongest indications there that Japan was about to launch a joint naval and land attack in the capital Bangkok. Brown confirms the offer of Pointe de Camo at the southern tip of Indochina and believed to have come from Saigon and Cam Bay. Major Elliott is still here in the studio beside us, and this report raises a point which I think he may be for us. Major Elliott, do you think the violence to cover the attack by these transports sailing up into the Bay of Siam and supposed Bangkok?
I think very likely that's the case, Mr. Daly. The Japanese would fear a fleet in those waters. It would be able to cut the line of communication with Japan, the home is in Japan, and the Japanese armies in China, which have connections with the main Japanese armies in China. So that the attack on Earth is intended to delay the arrival of the Pacific Fleet by doing what damage is possible. And if the carriers are sacrificed, why, that's just too bad.
Major Elliott, Cecil Brown, reporting from Singapore, also described British naval patrols as all the British Far Eastern Fleet bolstered by Wales, one of Britain's newest and biggest battleships, ready for instant action. The units of the British fleet in Singapore, in which the aircraft will be sufficiently strong to at least hold off that attack of the Japanese, which is reportedly headed for Bangkok.
So far, only Japanese cruisers have been reported in the Gulf of Siam, and they would be likely to be cut off by British battleships operating from Singapore. But under the circumstances, one would be inclined to believe that the main Japanese battle fleet may be somewhere in the vicinity, with perhaps trying in turn to cut the British off if they attack the Japanese concentrations in the Gulf of Siam, hoping that these Japanese ships would be able to get back toward their home bases before the American Pacific Fleet would arrive. And in turn, there is the factor of the unknown effect as yet of the Japanese air attacks on Pearl Harbor, which are intended to delay the movements of the Pacific Fleet.
Well, have you any information, Major, on the British shore defenses in Sarawak and North Borneo? Do you think they can make any great difference in this action that seems to be pending in the Gulf of Siam?
I think very likely that there are air bases there of considerable capacity. There was nothing 2 years ago but the British looking from the pond and offshore, both in Sarawak and farther north in the British Crown Colony of British Borneo. And they probably have increased have been mounted at one or two ports along that coast to establishing harbor defenses to protect against the immediate Japanese landing in Borneo, and they all out desperate they seem to be. They very likely will try to eliminate the bases.
Well, now, Major, we have here a bulletin that has just come in which says that policemen and firemen were ordered in a radio broadcast to go to Army and Navy posts immediately at Honolulu. And it brings up the question of the distance between Hawaii and Japan, which, if I remember correctly, is somewhere around 3,800 miles. Would that indicate that the Japanese attacks upon Oahu were made from carriers, necessarily, or are there Japanese-mandated islands which would be sufficiently well-developed to house either seaplanes or shore-based aircraft?
No, there's nothing that's near enough to direct an attack of any force. The attack must have been made from carriers. The nearest Japanese possessions in the Marshall Islands are so far from Honolulu that it's impossible to direct any serious air attack. Long-range flying boats might do something, but the Japanese would have no reason to do that. That would be merely a pinprick, and it would have no serious effect. If the Japanese are attacking Hawaii, they're attacking it with a purpose of producing some substantial military effect, and the number of the fire effect that could be produced by what few long-range flying boats can operate from January to the Marshalls is just not sufficient for the purpose.
Well, can you perhaps give us some light on the reason why the Japanese used even a small part of their forces for an attack on Hawaii rather than concentrating all of their strength on Cavite in the Philippines, which might, since it's so much closer to Japan, it would seem at least be a more important point of attack?
Because the fleet's in Hawaii, and they hope to be able to damage the vessels in harbor and the installations at Pearl Harbor to such an extent that they can delay the eastward movement of the fleet, which, after all, is dependent on its supplies for the support of Pearl Harbor as a base. The more damage they can do to the base and to the ships that are still there, of course we don't know the exact disposition of the American fleet, the more they can delay any vigorous action by the United States fleet in the Western Pacific because of the distances and the supply problem. Incidentally, the movement of policemen and firemen to important posts in Honolulu suggests the possibility that there may be some sort of a rising among the Japanese population. The Japanese live in the Hawaiian Islands, and some of them may be inclined to make trouble. Our authorities are supposed to have had this problem very well in hand, and we don't know yet, of course, whether anything of the sort is true or not.
Thank you very much, Major Elliott. And now, Elma Davis, CBS News analyst, who was hurriedly called into our 17th floor studios as New Far Eastern situation came in, is ready to analyze the political effects of this move plan. Davis.
Mr. Davis, was a week ago, he said they'd do more for negotiation. It was obvious that they were allowing themselves a limit, hoping that our military and naval forces would take them seriously, which obviously, we presume at least, they have not done. Since they actually wanted 1 week, it seems that our forces are probably, we hope at least, Hawaii and the Philippines, and that the Japanese from President Roosevelt attack United States bases staggered London, which awaited fulfillment of Prime Minister Churchill's promise to declare war on Japan within the hour if she attacked the United States. Well, of course, the United States and Japan are not formally at war. However, it seems probable that in view of the Japanese attacks, this is only a question for the reassembling of Congress tomorrow, since if you have actually been attacked by the enemy, you can do but little else. Direct from the front, from Honolulu. Guns rose over the Pearl Harbor area, apparently from fires. Witness said fires broke out on Ford Island. Well planned, and they seem aimed at the principal points that they should have attacked. And meanwhile, Roosevelt's message to the Emperor is one of the questions which has now passed into history. His Navy Air Base, Hickam Field, is there by the Army. It is apparent that the Japanese the attack from carriers, as Major Elliott has pointed out, head over the This is much for Admiral Nomura and Mr. Kurusu to say in Washington. They have served their purpose, Mr. Kurusu particularly. It might be remarked, so far as Nomura is concerned, a man who has many friends in the country, well known that presumably these would have past times if his government had not been different sort. Nomura is well known, well liked, but still a type of man, although they have had but little to say of what's in the past if they were in power, and who are perhaps the best of eventual good relations between America and Japan. But something else will have to be done first. Another bulletin from Hawaii that the attack was made by 50 unidentified airplanes, and that the main targets appeared to be Hickman Field, the Army bombing field, and the great naval base at Pearl Harbor. Several planes were shot down. This seemed reduced to futility, all diplomatic negotiations going on, but it seems probable that a statement of American policy history of the is likely to be given out in the efforts that are made to avert hostilities, to keep the Pacific question in which some peaceful settlement might still have been possible. Now it appears that the Japanese have positively rejected that, perhaps only a faction of the Japanese, but the faction of their Navy and the faction which is in control of the government, so that issue is ruled out. The General Premier had an army to make in the background of the country. The Japanese army, inasmuch as they were the emperor, and it was at least has not been proved possible in the last 10 or 15 years for any civilian government to follow the Army and Navy disapprove. And when General Tojo came out at last, we had one of the role of an agreement with him was something that would stick. But it appears that this particular ruling clique had no negotiations in him, and throw an endeavor which we have been successful, off American military and naval operations which might restrict Japanese operations in the Far East.
Thank you, Mr. KGMB, which is in Honolulu, and they report to us that the attacking planes number between 50 and 100, that the air raid is still on, and that the anti-aircraft fire can be heard in a drone as the attacking planes come in. As Mr. Davis told you, we received a bulletin just a little while ago which reported that there have been some of these, what Honolulu calls unidentified planes shot down. This latest report now is all we have to the moment. It's from Washington on the developments in our relations with Japan, the relations with the story of what is to happen that are to come. And Columbia will bring you important news bulletins during the broadcast of the New York Philharmonic Society, which follows this program, and will also bring all dance at the intermission time.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Today, Colombian reports foreign correspondent is presented over these by Gold Gasoline.
Not available. They will be in a few minutes. The attack apparently was made on all naval and military activities on the island of Oahu. The president was read to reporters by Stephen Early, the president's secretary. The Japanese upon police hostilities of this kind would naturally mean that the Minister of Congress had granted and of the Navy. Now the two Japanese envoys, Mura and Special Envoy Caruso, are at the State Department's activity of the Far Eastern hostilities now seem to be actually open Pacific. Even more important than the visit of Tokyo's diplomats is this news which comes from news which comes whatever the diplomat is saying. There is a conviction in official quarters here. It came to the State Department and the Navy day and today transports containing troops was steaming into the jetting a heavy escort. Having rounded southernmost point of French Indochina, the obvious destination. It was on the basis of this information that Roosevelt sent to Emperor Ito of Japan his personal message which appealed to the Mikado for peace. A plea from activities today are substantiated is a fine for these troops to Pearl Harbor. The balance which has maintained peace is destroyed. The four powers, the Union, the East, have given Japan a warning that invasion of would be action by the associated powers. And Caruso requested the appointment with Mr. Howday. The engagement was set for 1:40 p.m. Mitchell's office was open to them at 2:20. In the time, the president had prepared the state announced and was at Pearl Harbor there. His State Department reports of Japanese troops in France were separated. They did that from Tokyo, did his question about those movements last time to North Indochina, these movements on the Indo border. This information to Bowen then that the bulk of the Japs were in Indochina, where they were in a better position. His plea to Ito was also supported by developments, and the meeting between Secretaries of War and Navy this morning of the plans that are being Japan to believe that these preparations are any kind of bluff. Although officials are silent on what would be the definite consequence of a Japanese attack or an attack on Ireland is being said, and it may be very afternoon. First would be Tokyo. Immediate naval block, the American Navy will use both these steps were on his own executive authority, but an effective naval block, of course, continue long. As a fact, according to the president, those hostiles already with the just word at a attack and reported on Navy bases in Manila. Thus, we have official announcements from the White House that they have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, now attacked Army bases in Manila. We return you now to the White House. Return you now to...
In many respects has corrected its progress. The American team, Australia and Singapore and other crowds made ready for any eventuality. The fleet has been the 35,000-ton Prince of Wales. For a direct report on British reaction moves in the Far East, Bob is standing in the British capital. Go ahead, London.
First attacks on Hawaii and the Philippines on Charlie in New York had not been down. It is any reaction, but the British made what would happen became involved in war with Mexico. He did so in the had confirmed this. The naval vessel cruisers Indochina aiming northwest. That announcement backed up those earlier declarations telling of concentrating Indochina and afloat. About the president's battle in Brook. The main German tank forces have concentrated these documents have been about the caliber of and of tank armor, about tank speed versus tank weight, about the airplane as compared to the anti-tank gun as weapons of destruction, against as the theme, the conviction that Britain must counter the enemy's modern war technique with an organ. Now, not all is that something against war. For example, British late like a defensive wagons out west, catching up. It is that a great deal of this discussion is power. In fighting, the Royal Air Force has played a larger part than in any... But many military writers are saying that British planes still do not play the same integral part in a tank battle the German. A typical comment is senses the fleet loaded air soldiers up to a weapon. Is some of the report on the basics to Julian in the United States. Just yesterday, some observation Dr. Huxley is a who will suspicionism. Propaganda anyway. Things cause feet without any... They're more interested in the... German claims are printed in newspapers. A listener, powerful receiving set, soon covers the speaker one story to put out some announced at least local commissars. Now, in case you had not heard, that is now being done by commissar at now to Columbia in New York.
To recapitulate, the White House reported today Japanese air attacks. South Africa has seen a regrouping of forces by both sides. Trout reported campaign, but of course the Far East still holds the center for some time. Military exodus.
Taking the delay and impede Americans from the Far East. Apparently, the situation in which there was a war, Japanese attacked an American Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands. These men come from aircraft carriers, since the Japanese aircraft. This is two aircraft carriers within reach of powerful patrol bombers. Long-range armor is risk could only be assumed in the loss of the carrier attack, but may also the Japanese time to carry out operations in the east, the naval base and shipping in Oahu, unless over the Japanese object and carrying it out. Air attack on the Navy surrounding area is also important, but as far as carriers as the island of Oahu, the Japanese are the greatest of getting away with. They have sent. The Japanese have probably aircraft carriers in commission, unknown carriers converted from at least 3 or 4 of these more with craft, but together they make a formidable content. They can use an carrier anywhere from 3 to 50 aircraft, include both scouting, a desperate forlorn hope fitted on Mars and before the capable hand take losses and needed. The question is how they have the carriers that they have risked. And after the Japanese landing, I'm extremely and easing a probable expedition carrying troops sufficient numbers to attack with any hope could have proceeded across the some by our naval authorities. Consequently, it seems they made the on Manila one of more formidable troops. The policy has been as long as possible on the day. Their very preparation gain much time as they find it gain time and certainly cannot assess. While attacked today the Japanese Hawaii, particularly the Hawaiian group, the island's 7 most troubled maritime fortresses and guns defend the Pearl Harbor guns at any point. There is long to about 25,000 and probably now the Navy Air as long as they can feel that is where so they can be located by
The situation go direct from the danger zone, which has been a CBS correspondent watched ready for this attack. The report of Ford Wilkins, direct Manila.
The war in the citizen schools and into the news maybe military words and this pattern places which are known. As mobilized volunteer forces standing by in German in time, the state attention which is often guarding it on the east. And the large movement of jets accompanied headed by seeming darker sign toward impact. Across the China Sea from the
We return you now to CBS New York.
Broadcast description of the attack made upon the carry-on object that he started to talk about. Singapore cruises beneath and off of Siam, moving towards Thailand. There is news also. Our correspondent in Singapore that they're strong in the game of capturing. Brown confirms Jeff Camo at the southern tip, and Bulgon and Cameron Bay. Elliott is still here in studio beside us, and this report raises a point which I think perhaps he may be able to clear up for us. Major Elliott, do you think that this upon the attacks upon the into the Bay of Siam and supposedly to attack?
Frankly, that's Mr. Daly. The Japanese fear above everything was if Manila was still open to it, it would be able to cut the line of communication in Japan between the home bases in Japan, upon which everything depends, and the Japanese, which have legs at all. But the attack on Pearl Harbor is intended to be a damage, and if the carrier, that's why that's just too big.
Described as very accurate to British regions of Wales, one of Britain's newest which are not at Singapore, which are cruising in the area to Japanese headed for.
Well, Japanese cruisers and vibrated Singapore under the surface, perhaps in turn to